Alright guys, I finally got the part that I was telling you guys about during the unboxing of the NZXT fan controller. If you follow my vids, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen that video, feel free to check it out. But basically, my desktop is over here, and it's purposely out of the picture just to be more of a surprise. But basically, when I built my PC, my goal was to essentially get a very powerful machine that was capable of playing the latest games, handling my video editing, and just being a well-rounded machine that can tackle any task that I can throw at it and do it relatively quickly. Also, I wanted to not, spend a ton of money while doing so. So laptops, right here, this is my 3-year-old laptop I had since '09. It still works perfectly fine. But basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to replace my laptop and get a more powerful one. But in order to get a really powerful laptop nowadays that's capable of running all of the latest games, doing all your video editing, you're gonna be looking at least about $1,200 to $1,500 and up to get a respectable, powerful laptop. But if you build your own desktop, you can get a desktop that outperforms those laptops for relatively cheaper at about $700 or so. So now as I move the camera over here, you're gonna realize something new has been added to the system. And as you can see, this is something that I was planning on ever since I first got my HD 7850. So as you can see, if you probably don't even know what's the new part, it's another graphics card. So basically I have these set up as a Crossfire. These are two HD 7850s now. What I did first was I removed my old one. My old one is this one right here. I removed the old one and placed in the newer one by itself to get an idea and to see. First, I want to see if it works. That's like the first thing you always want to test. And next thing I want to see is how far can I push this graphics card? How far can I essentially overclock it? My old one right here it overclocks beautifully. I pretty much couldn't ask any more of it. This one, on the other hand, somewhat unfortunately doesn't overclock as good as this. This can run stable at about 1230 megahertz, while this can run stable at up to 1150. So this is 1230 megahertz, and this is up to 1150 megahertz. Still, this still overclocks pretty high. And that Unigine Heaven benchmark with the default settings that I usually use, which is the anti-aliasing on 4X, the tessellation on normal, 1920 by 1080, DX11 API. On stock, the HD 7850s gets about 44 to 45 frames per second. My older graphics card over here overclocked at about pretty much my normal day-to-day core clocks is 1200, so I'm going to say the overclock for that. At 1200 megahertz, my older HD 7850 goes from 44.1 stock to about, I believe it was 57 frames per second. So that's a very, very significant increase in frames per second. This, on the other hand, goes to about 54.5. So it's not even that much of a difference between the two. It's basically a 50 megahertz increase, but when I do overclock this to the maximum that it can go, which is my older HD 7850, which is 1250, I think it was actually 1240 megahertz to be exact. This can hit 61 frames per second, so this is about a 6 FPS boost than what the newer one can hit. So basically what I'm going to do now, since I found out the maximum overclocking ability of the new one, I'm going to have to run my older one at the same clock speeds, because in Crossfire, the fastest graphics card has to run at the fastest graphics card has to run at the speed as the slowest graphics card. So it makes no sense of me having my older one running at a higher clock speed, because it's not going to be able to run at that clock speed, because it's going to have to wait for the other graphics card to finish rendering. So basically having both of these running at 1150 megahertz is still going to be very, very powerful graphical computational capabilities. So I'm going to be able to run games on Ultra now at about 60 frames per second at around a resolution of 2560 by 1600, or in AMD's multi-monitor display, which is Infinity, I should be able to run games now at, you know, perfectly smooth frame rates at those ridiculously high, like 5000 by 1600 resolution, which is ridiculous. I do know that Crossfire is not perfect in the sense that the graphics card do not scale at 100%. So suppose I got a benchmark with one of these that was like 50 frames per second, and then if I add another one, you'd expect to get 100 frames per second, but that's not always going to be what you're going to get. Sometimes you may get more than 100 frames per second, and sometimes you may get less. So as the drivers get more mature and stuff like that, yeah, the frame rate from the Crossfire scaling will improve. But for right now, most of the modern day games that are of my interest support Crossfire, and as a result, I can be able to get even more frames per second as I would with one HD 7850. Also, to point out, the monitor that I use is a 1080p monitor, which is capable of only up to 60 hertz or 60 frames per second. So these two HD 7850s right now are in pretty much their overkill for my given monitor. So eventually I'm going to end up upgrading to either a 120 hertz monitor or a 2560 by 1440 monitor, or maybe a monitor that has both if I hit the lottery or something of that sort. So this has pretty much been a video showcasing the new amazing part that I have in my desktop, which is going to make this thing a gaming behemoth. You've already seen all my videos, my benchmarks, and the single HD 7850 that I had was running games like it was nothing. It was pretty much running everything on the highest settings, relatively good smooth frame rates. Now I added another one. Some of you may be asking why, but you know, I just love to have a lot of performance, you know. So if you guys have any questions or comments on how the installation goes right now, I'm going to set them up in AMD Catalyst as the Crossfire, set all those up, and I'm going to give you guys some benchmarks on how fast these two cards are while working together. So like I said, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to ask in the comment box. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Later.